Welcome to our Q&A for The Last City. I'm very pleased to be joined now by the film's director, Heinz Emigholz. Hi, Heinz. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I thought we could just start by talking a little bit about how this project evolved over the years, because you've been talking for some years now about the idea of a film that takes place in multiple cities. I think you called it like the Tale of Five Cities at one point. What was the initial idea for that, and how did it become The Last City?
It was in 2003 that I started the first draft, Tale of Five Cities, and I had a Moroccan producer, Karim Debak. I wanted to do a film in Fez, in Alexandria, basically around Europe and the Mediterranean. And then we didn't get the little money we were asking for, so I forgot about the whole project. But after Streetscapes dialogue, I thought, well, now I want to use this kind of new way of telling stories and having a dialogue with other topics. And then I came back to this project, and there were 5 different cities now because I got to know them, and I always wanted to film there. I had some sets in mind, and so this is how it evolved. But it actually became actual after Streetscapes dialogue, yes.
Yeah, I think in some ways this film picks up from Streetscapes dialogue. I mean, literally in the beginning when you see the 2 characters played by
yeah, but you don't have to see it before.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Right. But I'm curious about how that film, which I think even more so now, seems like a turning point of sorts in your work.
It is, because in doing that film, I developed a new way of dealing with my camera work. I do the camera myself, you know that. And for me, the camera, and I explained that in Streetscapes somehow in relation to the architecture film, is a third partner in my projects. It's a protagonist. And here, doing dialogues, I found out that how I did the camera is a third protagonist inside of the film. And it takes sides, it surrounds the protagonist and has a different view than they have. And that, well, for me, was a kind of revelation, because to have a camera as a protagonist told me, well, now you can tell every kind of story. So I decided to, on the 5 main topics I was interested in those days, which was family, youth versus old age, war guilt, and weapon design and cosmology. And I said, well, now I will write a dialogue. I didn't write the Streetscape dialogue, we just recorded it. But now, and then I found out that actually in that film, Streetscape dialogue, there was somebody worked on my blockade to work at all. But in this film, before this film, I found out, well, actually I had a blockade to tell stories, and now I want to tell stories, yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the most, noticeable things, obviously, if people have been following your work, is just the text, which suddenly emerges like with a vengeance in Streetscapes dialogue. It's just there's so much text there, but as you pointed out, that text was actually taken verbatim from a kind of psychoanalytic encounter. So that was like almost you're working with documentary material here. But here you've written I don't know if narrative is the right word, but you've written a script.
Yes, I did, and I followed the script somehow. I didn't know whether it would work,
Right.
but I followed it, and I think it works. Yes.
But it sounded like you were saying that you started with the process of selecting topics.
Yes, I did, because I said, well, now I'm free to tell stories. I lost this old blockade of the avant-garde, don't tell stories or so, which is for me was a kind of insane thing and had personal reasons to. But and then I thought, well, what do you actually want to concentrate on? And that were these 5 topics, that I just recall. And then I did interviews with people who dealt with these problems too. I talked to a lot of people, but then I started, and I started it was very fast. I did it here in Nadur, and it's a great place to write. And then a couple of months later, we could already start the film. It was I was very, very lucky. Yeah.
How did the 5 cities, the 5 locations align with the themes for you? I mean, I think it's maybe clearer in some than others.
Yeah. I think as the film evolves, you will know, of course, weapon design, psychoanalysis in Israel. We have cosmology, a very strange kind of cosmologist, very cool guy living in São Paulo, but being a cosmologist. And we have the real, which I already researched for decades, the Pacific War.
Mm-hmm.
Basically the Pacific War between the States and Japan, but now I dived into the story of the history of the Pacific War between China and Japan. So, and then of course the old theme, old and young, and family and sex and whatever comes about, in that aspect. And it deals with, I would say, all topics in that film deal somehow with, how you call it, problems like with unsolved, provocative themes that our societies deal with in these days. Yes.
You talked about this blockade against narrative, but I think we should note that you have made narrative films in the past. Even though you have made experimental work, non-narrative documentary work, you've also have made narrative films decades ago.
I did, and that was very important to me to start out with a kind of very basic abstract filmmaking that told me how to deal with the media and what the representational side of it actually means. And then I went into a kind of it's a trilogy of, I called it the trilogy of the 70s. So, and I filmed it in the 70s. So I was obsessed by the idea that you could film history while it was going on. And all these 3 films were then released in the 80s. And then the final film was The Holy Bunch, in German. The title is The Cynical Body. I got totally broke with that film, so I had to stop. I produced it myself. I had debts like hell. So I said, what can I do? I do want to go on filmmaking. So I said, well, I dropped the actors and continue with architecture, because I got more and more interested in architecture too.
Yeah. It's striking to hear you say that you wrote this very, very quickly. It's very... it's quite a dense and intricate text, and quite, I think as a script, also quite structurally complex. Can you say a little bit about how you...
Well, you know, that the idea is so old that maybe it worked on me for 15 years at least.
Right.
So, and then I had these complex themes that I wanted to tell, or what they are discussing in the film. And then the trick in writing was that moment when I said, oh no, well, here they are, the 5 cities. I want to produce these protagonists in the cities. I want to show the cities, the sides of the cities that I want to show. Maybe they are not just the conventional cityscapes that you see there. But then I got the idea to do a round dance, to go through all these 5 cities and then do a second turn. And that really brought me to writing it very fast, because then the film, the project became a kind of speed that was interesting for me, how to have these little cliffhangers there and then go on later. And I was very surprised that it really works. I didn't know that before. I'm not into this, these script writing, formula script writing. I never think about these formulas like 3x, 5x, or however many x. I just think, what is good for my kind of story, and then I find out when I see the film whether it works or not. So it's a kind of really large experiment. And now, of course, we can't go to these cities anymore, so we were lucky. I mean, we filmed till May 2019. Yes.
It's interesting that the structure also, you talk about the five topics, the 5 themes that you were drawn to, but I think the way the film plays out emphasizes the way that these themes are connected for you.
And there are secret threads between them, but they're not very obvious, so I will not spoil them.
Yeah, I actually noticed more on repeat viewings. But in addition to this La Ronde circular structure that you talk about, this idea of the double performance, it's not like the characters continue, but like the actors continue and are playing a different
yes,
different roles. So can you talk about that idea?
Yes, because I wanted to make a point. I'm not into identification. You don't have to identify with one type and then follow him. Just what he or she says is important. And so they play double roles. They're somehow secretly connected, but they represent 2 totally different persons, but just by what they are telling and a little bit with the looks or so. But I was not interested in playing like a hide and seek film or something like that. I wanted to be very open. There are 2 people and you see it, 2 actors. So we can't identify with one of them because there are already 2 people. Maybe we are 5 or 6 or 10 people. So I wanted to make that statement.
Can you? I wonder if the humor, which for me is like part of the genius of the film, I find it really like one of the funniest films that I've seen in some time. But also, it's like deadly serious, and horrific in parts. I mean, like the sequence of the Japanese war crimes. And is this a difficult tone for you to find, or is it something that just emerges very?
No, it was not difficult. It just came. I think. I don't know. I didn't look for it. It was there. I mean, I can't explain it.
Yeah.
And
but what about the question of judging like the appropriateness of humor, right? In certain, when you deal with subjects of a certain gravity.
No, the film is changing tone so fast. sometimes you want to start laughing and then it will be killed by what they say. And so it's a kind of ride you are on. And it's not that I'm not a school teacher saying, now, listen, this is really heavy stuff, now be very earnest. You can have different approaches to these scenes. And you know it from yourself that you sometimes laugh about terrible things. Mm-hmm. And here the film does it on a very, on a level that you never know somehow. How far does it go? How far? And then we go another way. So it's, for me, a tricky issue. I think humor doesn't work when you want to be funny. So I think it comes by itself. And yeah, I have to let it happen.
Can you say a little bit about the actors in the film, and also how you work with them with a text like this? Yes. Because I think we know John Erdman from his work in Streetscapes Dialogue, and also from his work with Yvonne Rainer and On Stage. And Johnny Perel is a filmmaker who was also in Streetscapes Dialogue. But there's a whole cast here. Like, can you say a little bit more about some of the other actors and how you work with them?
Yeah, it was fantastic work. And now with John I worked from the 70s on. He's already in the 3 films I mentioned before from the 70s. He has one lead in Die Basis des Make-up, which is a long film too, which has never been shown in the US. And so he knows me and my work very well. So it's a kind of, it was easy for me to decide that he plays the guy who was a filmmaker and can talk about filmmaker. And then Johnny, I met in Argentina. He's a filmmaker. I love his work. I heard him be discussed. I heard him talking. And so there's a story behind him getting involved in Streetscapes Dialogue. He didn't know that it was a long role, but then I convinced him it's not written as a conventional script. It's actually a document. So he got interested in that because he was interested in therapy too. And then he got interested in my work and loved to be invited to be in a feature film now too. Dorothy Ko, you might know as a professor at Columbia, she came to the screening of Streetscapes Dialogue at the Lincoln Center and asked me right away, I like to work with you. So I thought, oh, well, I'm just writing a script with a Chinese woman. So it happened. Then there's Yang, and he's a performer. He's not a professional film actor, but he became in my film. And then who else was there? Johnny Young. Did I mention all? No, Susanne. Susanne Sachsse is a German woman. She's a kind of diva. She plays roles. So in this film, she plays a really big role within the film. So that's why I chose her. And how I work with them, I work a lot with the text with them. So we do readings. And then we are quite safe when we go on the set. And we just they concentrate on the text. I concentrate then on the image. You know? Mm-hmm. But they basically don't know what kind of image I'm filming. They trust me. Okay.
Is there a performance style that you're going for? How would you describe it?
I can't describe it. It's a kind of documentary. Maybe you called it once deadpan, but maybe that's right, because I don't want to have them like the conventional breakdowns. acting out certain psychological drama on the screen. The drama should be within what they are talking about.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But of course they react to each other. Yes, of course it. But on a more reduced scale. It's not like this acting.
Right, because they're not playing like characters in a conventional sense.
No.
Yeah.
No. They don't even have a name, I think. I don't know about that. They have roles. For example, that some of them is a priest, some of them is policeman, some of them, one of them is a mother, one of them is an artist, one of them for a while, only for a while, one of them is a cosmologist. And so there's a certain role defined by their activities or their professions.
Right. So just a couple more for the last city. I'm curious about how you work with over the period of time where you were making these architecture films. You developed a style that I think was very recognizable. Your approach to space and location. What happens when a human subject is introduced? I'm wondering if your approach to the camera changes, and also your approach to just the locations. Is the preparation the same for you when you look for spaces where you will situate?
So this kind of camera offers for me much more possibilities to connect spaces and people than in the conventional way of shooting. A friend of mine, for example, wrote a theory of conventional film editing, and I could throw that away from my film because I have so many different angles to go with that it opens up a new field of camera work. That's what I mentioned before. That was so important for me and Streetscapes dialogue, and also the actors, of course. I mean, there's this joke. Hitchcock says they're just cattle. No, they're not cattle, but there are certain two-dimensional space. They take a two-dimensional space on the frame, and of course you compose them not like cattle, but maybe like architecture. And so it's not a very different approach, but it's now something else. It's not just the camera and me and the architecture. Now there's even another part in it which has a certain movement in itself. So it's a wonderful three-dimensional play that goes on there. Yes.
Lastly, I wanted to
believe in foreground, background. So they, for me, it's all negative space between buildings and people, space between people. They're just all the same for me when I do the composition in the camera. I don't put the most interesting object into the middle of the frame. I hate that. I like to work with the periphery of a frame. And so there, density comes into play. And I don't repeat shots. That's a very important thing in my filmmaking, because I think repeating shots, like, for example, when you film a conventional dialogue, you have always two shots over the shoulder, one master shot, see them all, and then back and forth and back and forth. For me, that's so boring and cheating that I just cut off the film. I can't stand it because I know, oh, now they cut out a little bit again and then they continue. I want the audience not to know what will be the next shot. Where do they go? Where does the camera go? Where? And so on that level, there's a Yeah, I would say suspense too.
Mm-hmm.
A kind of hidden suspense.
Yeah.
But, yes.
How many setups do you do on average for like a dialogue scene? Like, you know.
Well, I don't know how long, but we cut very fast. I think we cut as fast as a conventional.
Right. No, but how many?
That's the city cutting. But what do you mean by?
How many camera setups would you have? How many angles would
say
you?
half a page of dialogue, maybe 6 setups for half a page.
Right.
Which is a lot, you know. Yeah.
Right, because the way you cut in some of these, you also often just cut mid-sentence, and then they're like in a different.
Yes. And it has to be. We have to do very good sound work so that we don't fall into these gaps all the time.
Right. So, just the last question for the last city. I wanted you to say a bit about the very strikingly staged car crash, which is, you know, it's to have an action scene in your films is unusual. But then I also remember that Streetscapes dialogue does open with a car accident as well, and I think there's a reference to car crashes in the Athens section of the film.
Yeah, also because I crashed a lot of cars, so it's maybe that's an autobiographical issue here. But I even write a script now with a gigantic car crash. But
it's not the cheapest thing to film usually.
That was very cheap. I mean, we did it very economically. You know?
Yes.
Yeah, the film is so cheap. I will never mention how cheap it is. Otherwise, people think you can do it without money.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, you know, I'm sorry you couldn't be here physically for the screenings.
Yeah,
but,
that feels awful. I would like to meet my friends and so on. And
we'll have cinema screenings when it's possible, and hopefully with you as well. But
just write me if they like the film. I like response.
Yes. So thank you, Heinz. And I urge everybody to also check out the other film by Heinz in our lineup, which is called The Lobby. Thank you very much.